The old wooden gate creaked in the wind as dark clouds gathered above the Montana hills. Tom Bradley had seen plenty of storms in his 58 years, but something about this one felt different. The air was thick and heavy, and his cattle were restless in the far pasture. He was checking the fence line near his front gate when he saw it. A small figure stumbling down the dirt road, moving like someone who hadn't eaten in days. At first, Tom thought it might be a lost hiker, but as the figure got closer, he realized it was just a kid. A boy, maybe 12 years old, wearing clothes that had seen better days and carrying a small backpack that looked ready to fall apart. The boy's steps were unsteady, and he kept looking over his shoulder like someone might be following him. When he reached Tom's gate, he grabbed onto the metal bars and just stood there, swaying on his feet. Tom could see the exhaustion written all over the kid's face. "Hey there," Tom called out, walking slowly toward the gate. He didn't want to scare the boy. "You okay, son?" The boy looked up with tired brown eyes that seemed way too old for his young face. His dark hair was messy and damp with sweat, and there were smudges of dirt on his cheeks. He was breathing hard, like he'd been walking for miles. "Sir," the boy said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, "I'm looking for heaven. My grandma told me it was a place with horses and big skies where people are kind." He paused, clutching something in his pocket. "I'm too tired to fight anymore. Please, if this isn't it, can you just point me in the right direction?" Tom felt something twist in his chest. This wasn't the first time a runaway had wandered onto his property, but there was something about this kid that was different. The way he asked about heaven like it was a real place he could find on a map. The complete exhaustion in his voice. The way he held himself like he'd been carrying the weight of the world. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the first fat raindrops started to fall. The boy didn't even seem to notice. He just kept staring at Tom with those tired eyes, waiting for an answer. "What's your name, son?" Tom asked, opening the gate. "Danny," the boy replied. "Danny Peterson." "Are you going to call the police?" Tom studied the kid's face. There was fear there, but also a kind of resigned acceptance, like Danny had been through this before and knew what came next. The rain was picking up, and the boy was already getting soaked. "Not right now," Tom said. "But we need to get you out of this storm. Come on." Danny hesitated for a moment, then stepped through the gate. As they walked toward the house, Tom noticed how the boy kept looking around at everything. The horses in the nearby paddock, the wide open sky, the rolling hills that stretched to the horizon. There was wonder in his eyes now, mixed with the exhaustion. "Is this your place?" Danny asked as they approached the simple ranch house. "Yeah, been here about 15 years now," Tom replied. "It's not much, but it's home." "It's beautiful," Danny said quietly. "Really beautiful." The storm hit just as they reached the front porch. Rain poured down in sheets, and lightning lit up the darkening sky. Tom opened the door and gestured for Danny to go inside. The house was warm and dry, with wooden floors and simple furniture. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and comfortable. Danny stood in the entryway, dripping water onto the floor and looking around like he couldn't quite believe where he was. "You hungry?" Tom asked. Danny nodded but didn't say anything. Tom could see the boy swaying on his feet, exhaustion finally catching up with him. "Bathroom's down the hall if you want to clean up," Tom said. "I'll make us some food." While Danny was in the bathroom, Tom heated up leftover stew and made some fresh bread. He could hear the water running and hoped the kid was okay. When Danny came back out, his face was clean and his hair was combed, but he still looked like he might collapse at any moment. They sat at the kitchen table, and Tom watched as Danny ate slowly, like he was afraid the food might disappear. The boy's hands were shaking slightly, and Tom could see old bruises on his arms. "How long you been walking?" Tom asked gently. 3 days, Danny replied between bites. "Maybe 4. I lost track." "Where'd you come from?" Danny's face went guarded. "A place I didn't want to stay." Tom nodded and didn't push. He'd been a rancher long enough to know when not to ask questions. Instead, he just let the boy eat and listen to the storm outside. After dinner, Danny reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. He placed it carefully on the table, smoothing out the creases with gentle fingers. "This is my grandma," he said quietly. "She used to tell me stories about a place that was like heaven on earth. She said it had horses and wide open skies and people who cared about each other. She said if I ever got lost, I should try to find a place like that." Tom looked at the photo. It showed an elderly woman with kind eyes standing next to a white horse. Behind them was a modest farmhouse with rolling hills in the background. The landscape looked familiar, but Tom couldn't quite place it. "She sounds like she was a special lady," Tom said. "She was the only person who ever really loved me," Danny replied. "She died 2 years ago, and since then, everything's been—" He trailed off, staring at the photo. Another flash of lightning lit up the windows, followed by a crack of thunder that shook the house. Danny flinched and looked toward the window with wide eyes. "It's okay," Tom said. "The storm will pass." "They always do." But as he looked at the exhausted boy sitting at his table, clutching that old photograph like it was his most precious possession, Tom realized that some storms took longer to pass than others. Some storms lived inside people, following them. Wherever they went, Danny's eyes were drooping now, the warmth and food finally allowing his body to relax. Tom could see the kid fighting to stay awake, probably afraid that if he fell asleep, he'd wake up somewhere he didn't want to be. "You can sleep on the couch tonight," Tom said. "We'll figure out what comes next in the morning." Danny looked at him with surprise. "You're not going to make me leave?" "Not in this storm," Tom replied. "And definitely not when you're this tired." As Tom helped Danny settle on the couch with some blankets, the boy looked up at him with those old, tired eyes. "Thank you," Danny whispered. "Maybe this really is close to heaven after all." Tom turned off the lights and headed to his own room, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet, lonely life was about to change in ways he never expected. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, for the first time in a long while, the old ranch house felt like it had purpose again. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as Tom quietly made breakfast. He'd been up since 5, like always, but this time he found himself moving more carefully, trying not to wake the boy sleeping on his couch when he peeked into the living room. Danny was still curled up under the blankets, the old photograph clutched in his small hand even in sleep. Tom had spent most of the night thinking about what to do. His first instinct was to call the authorities, but something about Danny's fear when he'd asked about the police made him hesitate. The kid was running from something, and Tom had a feeling it wasn't just teenage rebellion. The smell of bacon and eggs finally stirred Danny awake. Tom watched from the kitchen doorway as the boy sat up slowly, looking around with confusion before remembering where he was. For just a moment, Danny's face showed pure relief, like he'd been afraid it was all a dream. "Morning," Tom said gently. "You sleep okay?" Danny nodded, carefully folding the blankets. "Thank you for letting me stay." "I can leave now if you want. No rush," Tom replied. "Come eat something first?" At the breakfast table, Danny ate with the same careful hunger as the night before. Tom noticed how the boy kept glancing toward the windows like he was planning escape routes. It reminded Tom of the wild horses he sometimes found on his property, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. "So, Danny," Tom said, keeping his voice casual, "tell me about your grandma. She sounds like she meant a lot to you." Danny's face softened as he looked at the photograph beside his plate. "She was everything to me. When my parents died in the car accident, I was only 7. Grandma Rose took me in and made me feel like I still had a family." Tom's chest tightened. He'd lost his own parents young and knew that kind of pain. "What happened to her?" "Cancer," Danny said quietly. "She fought it for a year, but in the end, ... He trailed off, staring at his eggs. "Before she died, she used to tell me stories about the farm where she grew up. She said it was the most beautiful place on earth, with white horses and fields. That went on forever. She called it her piece of heaven." "Sounds like a special place," Tom said. "She always said that if I ever felt lost or scared, I should try to find a place like that. Somewhere with wide open spaces and animals to care. For she said places like that had a way of healing broken hearts." Danny picked up the photograph and traced his finger along the edge. This is the only picture I have of her at the old farm. She's standing next to Snowball, her favorite horse. Look how happy she looks. Tom studied the photo more carefully. This time, the woman in the picture had the same kind eyes as Danny, and behind her, the rolling hills and fence lines looked strangely familiar. Something about the way the mountains sat on the horizon tugged at his memory, but he couldn't quite place it. After she died, where did you go? Tom asked gently. Danny's expression darkened. Foster care? They said I was lucky to find a family. So quickly. He let out a bitter laugh that sounded too old for his 12 years. The Hendersons seemed nice at first. Big house, nice cars, talked about giving me opportunities. Tom waited, sensing there was more to the story. But they only wanted me for the monthly check from the state, Danny continued. Mr. Henderson had a temper, especially when he'd been drinking, and Mrs. Henderson just pretended not to see the bruises. Tom's hands clenched into fists under the table. Did you tell anyone? I tried. But the Hendersons were good at pudding. On the show, when the social workers came around? Clean house, smiling faces, stories about how much they loved having me. Danny's voice got smaller. After a while, I stopped trying to tell anyone. Who would believe a foster kid over a nice family? Like them? So you ran away? Danny nodded. 3 times. They always found me and brought me back. But last week, something happened that made me realize I couldn't stay anymore. Tom waited, but Danny seemed to struggle with the words. Mr. Henderson came. Home really drunk and angry about something at work. He started yelling at me about leaving dishes in the sink. When I tried to apologize, Danny touched his ribs gingerly. I ended up locked in my room for 2 days with no food. The anger building in Tom's chest was hot and sharp. He'd seen plenty of cruelty in his life, but hearing about someone hurting a kid like Danny made him want to drive straight to the Henderson house and have a very serious conversation. That's when I decided I had to find Grandma Rose's heaven. Danny continued. I snuck out while they were sleeping and started walking. I figured if I could just find a place like she described, maybe I could stay there. Maybe someone would let me help with the animals in exchange for a place to sleep. How did you end up here? Tom asked. I've been walking for days asking people if they knew about any farms with white horses. Most people just looked at me like I was crazy. But yesterday, a trucker said he'd seen some white horses on a ranch about 10 miles up this road. Danny looked around the kitchen. When I saw your horses last night and this place with all the open space, I thought maybe you'd found what you were looking for. Danny shrugged, suddenly looking very young and vulnerable. I know it sounds stupid, a 12-year-old kid thinking he can just find heaven on a map, but I didn't know where else to go. Tom reached across the table and gently touched Danny's hand. It doesn't sound stupid at all. Sometimes when we're hurting, we need to believe there's somewhere better waiting for us. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the horses graze in the paddock outside the window. One of them, a beautiful white mare named Star, lifted her head and seemed to look directly at them. She's beautiful, Danny breathed. Just like Snowball in the picture. Would you like to meet her? Tom asked. Danny's eyes lit up for the first time since Tom had met him. Really? You'd let me? Course, but first we need to talk about what happens next. You can't just disappear forever, Danny. People will be looking for you. The light in Danny's eyes dimmed. You're going to send me back, aren't you? Tom saw the fear creeping back into the boy's face and made a decision that surprised even him. Not today. Today, we're going to introduce you to the horses and show you around the ranch. Tomorrow. Well, we'll figure out tomorrow when it comes. For the first time since Tom had met him, Danny smiled. It was small and cautious, but it was real. Think. You, Danny whispered. Grandma Rose always said that angels sometimes look like ordinary people. As they walked toward the paddock together, Tom found himself wondering if maybe Danny had been right to come looking for heaven, maybe sometimes. It wasn't about the place you found, but about the people who chose to help you when you needed it most. 3 days had passed since Danny first stumbled onto Tom's ranch, and the boy was still jumping at shadows. Tom watched from the kitchen window as Danny sat on the porch steps, gently brushing one of the barn cats. Even from a distance, Tom could see the tension in the kid's shoulders, the way he kept looking down the road like he expected trouble to come. Driving up any minute, the nightmares had started the second night. Tom woke up to the sound of Danny crying out in his sleep, words like, "Please stop and I'll be good," that made Tom's heart ache. When he'd gone to check on the boy, he found Danny sitting up on the couch, wide awake and shaking. "Just a bad dream," Danny had whispered, but Tom could see the fear in his eyes was real doubt now. Watching Danny with the cat, Tom could see how exhausted the boy really was. Not just tired from walking for days, but worn down deep in his soul. It was the kind of tiredness that came from never feeling safe. Never knowing when the next blow might fall, Tom stepped outside and sat down beside Danny on the steps. The cat, a friendly orange tabby named Rusty, immediately jumped into Tom's lap and started purring. "He likes you," Danny said softly. "Animals can tell when someone's good." "Is that what your grandma taught you?" Danny nodded. "She said animals don't lie or pretend. If they trust you, it means you're worth trusting." He paused, scratching behind Rusty's ears. "She also said that people who are kind to animals usually have good hearts." Tom smiled. "Smart woman." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the horses graze in the distance. Star, the white mare, had taken a special liking to Danny over the past few days. Every time the boy appeared near the fence, she would walk over and gently nuzzle his hand. "Tom," Danny said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper, "what if they find me?" "Who?" "The Hendersons." "Or the social workers. What if they come looking for me here?" Tom could hear the panic creeping into Danny's voice. "Hey, look at me." Danny turned to face him, and Tom saw tears gathering in the boy's eyes. "I'm too tired to keep running," Danny said, his voice breaking. "I can't do it anymore, but I can't go back there either. I just can't." Tom felt something shift inside his chest. Over the past few days, he'd been telling himself he was just helping a kid in trouble, that he'd figure out what to do soon. But seeing Danny break down like this, seeing the absolute exhaustion and fear in his young face, Tom realized he couldn't just hand this boy over to a system that had already failed him. "You don't have to run anymore," Tom said quietly. "And you're not going back to the Hendersons." "But what if the police come?" "What if they make me go back?" Tom was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Danny, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you in any kind of legal trouble? Did you do something wrong before you came here?" Danny shook his head quickly. "No, sir, I just ran away. I never stole anything or hurt anyone. I just I just couldn't stay there anymore. Then we'll figure it out. There are laws to protect kids like you. People whose job it is to make sure you're safe." But they didn't protect me before," Danny said, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "They put me with the Hendersons in the first place." Tom couldn't argue with that. The system had failed Danny, and the boy had every right to be scared. But Tom also knew that running away wasn't a long-term solution. "What if I told you that I'm thinking about asking if you could stay here?" Tom said carefully. "Officially, I mean." "Like permanently?" Danny's eyes went wide. "You'd do that?" "But you barely know me." "I know enough," Tom replied. "I know you're a good kid who's been through hell. I know you love animals and you're not afraid of hard work. I know you light up when you talk about your grandma, and I know you deserve better than what you've been given." Danny was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "What if I'm too broken?" he whispered. "What if I'm too messed up from everything that happened?" Tom's heart nearly broke hearing those words from a 12-year-old. "You're not broken, Danny, you're hurt, and that's different. Hurt things can heal if they're given the right care." "How do you know?" Tom pointed toward the paddock where a brown horse with a pronounced limp was grazing peacefully. "See Thunder over there? When I found him, he was half dead from neglect. Previous owner had beaten him so badly he could barely walk. Took months of patience and gentle care, but look at him now." Danny watched the horse, taking in how calm and content he seemed despite his limp. "Animals and people aren't that different," Tom continued. "Give them safety, consistency, and someone who cares. about them and they can recover from almost anything. But what if I have another nightmare? What if I mess up your house or your routine? I'm not used to people being nice to me without wanting something back. Tom could hear the years of conditioning in Danny's voice, the expectation that kindness always came with a price. Danny, listen to me. I've been living alone on this ranch for 3 years now, ever since my wife died. It's been quiet, maybe too quiet, having you here. It's reminded me what it feels like to have purpose again. Really? Really. When I see you working with the animals, or reading one of Beth's old books, or just sitting here enjoying the sunset, it makes this place feel alive again. Danny was quiet, processing what Tom had said. Beth was your wife? Yeah, she always wanted kids, but it just never happened for us. She would have loved you, Danny. She had the same gentle way with animals. That you do? Do you miss her every day? But having you here doesn't make me miss her less. It just makes me think she'd be happy that I'm not giving up on living. They sat together as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Star wandered over to the fence and whinnied softly, as if calling to them. She wants you to come say good night, Tom said. Danny stood up and walked over to the fence. Star immediately came to him, pressing her soft nose against his palm. Danny stroked her neck gently, and for the first time since Tom had known him, the boy looked truly peaceful. Tom, Danny called softly, if you really meant what you said about me staying ... I'd like that. I'd like it a lot. Tom felt a warmth spread through his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Then we'll make it happen, son, whatever it takes. As they walked back to the house together, Tom noticed that Danny's shoulders weren't quite so tense anymore. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since his wife died, Tom felt like he had something worth fighting for. 2 weeks had passed since Danny arrived at the ranch, and Tom was amazed at the changes he was seeing. The scared, exhausted boy who had collapsed at his gate was slowly being replaced by someone who actually smiled from time to time. It wasn't a complete transformation, not yet, but there were small moments that gave Tom hope. This morning was one of those moments. Tom woke up to find Danny already outside, sitting cross-legged in the grass next to Star's paddock. The white moray had her head lowered so Danny could stroke her nose, and the boy was talking to her in soft, gentle tones. Tom couldn't hear the words from the kitchen window, but he could see the peace on Danny's face. When Tom stepped outside with 2 cups of hot chocolate, Danny looked up with a shy smile. Morning, Danny said. Star was restless, so I thought I'd keep her company. How'd you know she was restless? Tom asked, handing Danny one of the cups. She was pacing and whinnying softly. Grandma Rose taught me that horses do that when they're worried about something. Danny took a sip of the hot chocolate and sighed contentedly. I told her about the storm coming in tonight. Sometimes it helps if they know what to expect. Tom looked at the clear blue sky, then at Danny with surprise. How do you know there's a storm coming? The way the birds are flying. And thunders. Leg is bothering him more today, which always happens before bad weather. Danny pointed to where the brown horse was favoring his injured leg slightly. Animals know things before we do. Sure enough, by evening, dark clouds were rolling in from the west. Tom found himself impressed once again by Danny's natural understanding of the animals and the land around him. After dinner, they settled into what had become their routine. Danny would curl up on the couch with one of Beth's old books while Tom worked on ranch paperwork at the kitchen table. Tonight, Danny was reading a collection of adventure stories that had belonged to Tom's wife when she was young. Tom? Danny called from the living room. Yeah? Beth had really good taste in books. This one about the lost treasure is amazing. Tom smiled. She was always reading. Said books could take you anywhere you wanted to go. I can see why she loved them. Danny paused. Can I ask you something about her? Tom set down his pen and walked over to the couch. Course. What was she like? I can tell she was special from the way you talk about her. Tom sat down in the armchair across from Danny, thinking about how to describe the woman who had been his whole world for 25 years. Beth was sunshine, Tom said finally. She could walk into a room and make everyone feel better just by being there. She loved this ranch almost as much as I did, maybe more. Every morning she'd go out and greet every single animal by name. She named all of them. Every horse, cow, chicken, and barn cat. Said giving something a name meant you cared about its individual story. Tom chuckled at the memory. She'd spend hours just watching them, learning their personalities. Danny's eyes lit up. Like how Star is curious but careful and Thunder is protective of the younger horses. Exactly like that. You remind me of her sometimes, the way you notice things about the animals that other people miss. They were quiet for a moment, listening to the first rumbles of thunder in the distance. Do you think she would have liked me? Danny asked quietly. Tom felt his throat tighten. Danny, she would have loved you. She always said this ranch was meant to be filled with laughter and young voices, having you here. It's like she's getting her wish, even though she's not here. To see it, the storm hit around midnight, just as Danny had predicted. Tom woke up to the sound of rain pounding on the roof and wind howling around the house. He was about to roll over and go back to sleep when he heard a soft whimper from the living room. He found Danny sitting up on the couch, clutching the photograph of his grandmother. The boy wasn't fully awake, but he was clearly having another nightmare. It's okay, Tom said softly, sitting down on the edge of the couch. You're safe, just a storm passing through. Danny's eyes opened, confusion and fear clouding his features. Tom? Right here, you're at the ranch, remember? Safe and sound. Danny nodded, but Tom could see he was still shaking. Sorry I woke you up. I know the nightmares are annoying. They're not annoying, Danny. They're your mind's way of trying to process some pretty terrible things. It's normal. Normal? Danny looked surprised. After what you've been through? Absolutely normal. It would be stranger if you didn't have bad dreams. Danny was quiet for a moment, listening to the storm. In the foster homes, they used to get mad when I had nightmares, said I was being dramatic or looking for attention. Tom felt that familiar anger rise in his chest. Well, they were wrong. Dead wrong, Tom? Danny's voice was small. Would it be okay if I stayed up for a while? I don't think I can go back to sleep yet. Tell you what, Tom said, standing up. How about we make some tea and sit in the kitchen? Sometimes it helps to be somewhere different when your mind won't settle. They moved to the kitchen, and Tom put the kettle on while Danny sat at the table with his grandmother's photograph. The sound of the rain was softer here, more comforting than threatening. She looks happy in this picture, Tom observed, studying the photo again. She was. Grandma Rose said the farm was the happiest time of her life. She told me she felt closest to God when she was taking care of the animals. Tom poured the hot water over the tea bags, thinking about something that had been nagging at him for days. Danny, can I see that picture again? Danny handed it over, and Tom examined it more closely. By the light of the kitchen lamp. The fence posts, the way the hills rolled in the background, the old barn barely visible in the distance, it was all starting to look very familiar. Where exactly was your grandmother's farm? Tom asked carefully. I don't know the exact address. Somewhere in this county, I think. She said it was about 30 miles from the nearest big town. Danny paused. Why? Tom studied the photograph one more time, his heart beginning to race. Danny, I think I might know where this picture was taken. What do you mean? Tom walked over to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a folder of old documents. He'd inherited them when he bought the ranch, papers that traced the property's history back several decades. When I bought this place 15 years ago, the previous owner said it had been in the same family for generations. A family named Peterson. Danny's eyes went wide. Peterson? That was Grandma Rose's maiden name. Tom found what he was looking for, an old deed that listed the previous owners. Rose Peterson sold this property to the bank in 1987 after her husband died. The bank held on to it for years before I came along. Danny stared at Tom in disbelief. You mean ... is it? This is Grandma Rose's farm? I think it might be. The old farmhouse was torn down before I bought the place. But look at this. Tom pointed to the hills visible through the kitchen window. See how they line up exactly like in your picture? Danny looked from the photograph to the window and back again, tears starting to form in his eyes. She was right, he whispered. She said if I looked for heaven I'd find it, and I did. I found my way home. Tom felt tears prick his own eyes as he watched Danny piece together the incredible coincidence that had brought him to this exact place. Outside, the storm was beginning to pass, and the first hints of dawn were touching the horizon. But inside the kitchen, two people who had both lost so much were beginning to understand that sometimes the universe has a way of bringing the right people together at exactly the right time. The next morning, Danny woke up feeling different. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged somewhere. The discovery that he was living on his grandmother's old farm felt like a miracle, but part of him wondered if it was too good to be true. Tom was already up, making breakfast and humming softly to himself. Danny had never heard him hum before, and it made the kitchen feel even more warm and welcoming. "Morning," Tom said with a smile. "Sleep better after we talked?" "Yeah, I did, thank you." Danny sat down at the table, still clutching his grandmother's photograph. "Tom, about last night. Do you really think this is the same place?" "I'm pretty sure it is. But if you want to know for certain, I've got some old photo albums that might help. The previous owner left them behind when I bought the place." Danny's heart started racing. "Really? Can we look at them?" After breakfast, Tom led Danny to a storage closet in the hallway. He pulled out a dusty cardboard box and set it on the kitchen table. "These belong to the Peterson family. I never really looked through them much, but maybe we'll find something that matches your picture." Danny's hands trembled as Tom opened the box. Inside were several photo albums, some loose pictures, and a few handwritten letters tied with a faded ribbon. Tom opened the first album, and Danny gasped. The very first page showed a young couple standing in front of a small white farmhouse. Behind them, the rolling hills and distant mountains were exactly the same as the view from Tom's kitchen window. "That's them," Danny whispered, pointing to the woman in the photo. "That's my grandma when she was young." They turned the pages slowly, finding picture after picture of life on the farm. There was Rose feeding chickens, hanging laundry on a line, working in a vegetable garden. In one photo, she was standing next to a white horse that looked exactly like the one in Danny's picture. "There's Snowball," Danny said, his voice thick with emotion. "And look, there's the old barn." Tom studied the photos, comparing them to his current property. "The barn in these pictures was where I built my equipment shed. And that vegetable garden was right where my front porch is now." Danny picked up one of the loose photographs. It showed Rose as an older woman, maybe in her 50s, standing in the same spot, but now the farmhouse looked run down and the fences needed repair. "This must have been taken not long before she had to sell," Tom said gently. Danny found a letter in the box and carefully unfolded it. It was written in Rose's handwriting, dated 1987. "What does it say?" Tom asked. Danny read aloud, his voice breaking. "My dear Robert, I know you think I should keep the farm, but I can't maintain it alone anymore. My heart is breaking to sell the only home I've ever loved, but at least I know the land will be here for future generations. Maybe someday someone else will love this place as much as we did. Maybe they'll feel the peace and joy that these hills and valleys can bring to a person's soul." Danny looked up at Tom with tears in his eyes. "She was talking about you, about us." Tom felt a lump form in his throat. "Sounds like she was." They spent the next hour going through more pictures and letters. Danny learned that his grandmother had raised cattle and horses, just like Tom did now. She'd had a garden where she grew vegetables and flowers. She'd loved watching the sunrise from the front porch and the sunset from the back pasture. In one letter to a friend, Rose had written about her dreams for the farm. "I always hoped that someday there would be children's laughter in these fields. Again, children who could learn to love the land and the animals the way we have. She wanted kids here," Danny said softly. "Just like Beth did." "Seems like both the women we loved had the same dream for this place," Tom replied. Danny picked up another photo that made him gasp. It showed Rose standing next to a young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old. The boy had dark hair and serious eyes, and he was petting a barn cat. "That's my dad," Danny said, his voice full of wonder. "I've never seen a picture of him as a kid." Before, Tom looked at the photo, then at Danny. The resemblance was unmistakable. "You look just like him." "Grandma Rose used to tell me stories about bringing my dad here during summer vacations. She said he loved the animals and wanted to be a rancher when he grew up." Danny's face fell slightly. "But then he met my mom and moved to the city for work." "Your dad lived here?" "Not full-time, but he spent a lot of summers here as a kid. Grandma said this place shaped who he became, taught him to be gentle and kind." Danny traced his finger along the edge of the photo. "After he died, she used to say that part of him would always be here in these hills." Tom felt like pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. "Danny, do you realize what this means? This isn't just your grandmother's land. This is where your father learned to love animals and nature. This place is part of your family's story going back generations." Danny nodded, overwhelmed by the magnitude of it all. "It's like everything that happened. All the bad stuff with the foster homes and running away, it was all leading me back here." Back home, they found more treasures in the box. A drawing that Danny's father had made as a child, showing the farm with stick figures of people and animals. A dried flower that Rose had pressed between pages of a book. A small wooden carving of a horse that Danny's grandfather had made. But the most incredible discovery came at the bottom of the box. Tom pulled out a sealed envelope with "For the Future" written on it in Rose's careful handwriting. "Should we open it?" Tom asked. Danny nodded, holding his breath. Inside was a letter and a small key. Tom read the letter aloud. "To whoever finds this letter, I hope it means that someone special is now caring for this land that I loved so much. This place has the power to heal broken hearts and bring peace to troubled souls. I pray that it continues to be a sanctuary for those who need it most. The key is to a small box buried under the old oak tree by the pond. Inside you'll find something I hope will bring comfort to whoever calls this place home." Danny's eyes were wide. "There's a treasure buried here." "Looks like it. You want to go find that oak tree?" They spent the next hour searching the property until they found an old oak tree by a small pond in the back pasture. Sure enough, there was a small metal box buried in the soft earth beneath it. Inside the box, they found more photographs, a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to Rose, and a letter addressed, "To my future family." Danny opened the letter. With shaking hands, "If you're reading this, it means that this land has called you home, just like it called to me so many years ago. I believe that places like this choose their people, not the other way around. Take care of each other and take care of this beautiful land. Let it heal you the way it healed me. And remember that love never really dies, it just changes form and finds new ways to bless the world." Danny looked up at Tom, tears streaming down his face. "She knew, somehow, she knew I would come back." Tom put his arm around Danny's shoulders. "Maybe she did. Or maybe love is just that powerful, that it can reach across time and bring people home." As they walked back to the house together, Danny felt something he'd never experienced before, the absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. 3 weeks after discovering Danny's connection to the ranch, Tom knew he couldn't put off the inevitable any longer. The boy needed to be in school, needed proper documentation, and most importantly, needed legal protection from ever being sent back to an abusive situation. It was time to contact the authorities. But Tom was determined to do it on his own terms. Danny was in the barn brushing Star when Tom found him that morning. The boy had developed such a routine with the horses that they all seemed to expect his visits at certain times of the day. "Danny, we need to talk," Tom said gently. The brush stopped moving in Danny's hand. "You're going to turn me in, aren't you?" "Not exactly, but we need to make your situation here legal. You can't hide forever, and honestly, you shouldn't have." "Tio," Danny's face went pale. "What if they make me go back to the Hendersons? What if they don't believe me about what happened?" Tom sat down on a hay bale and gestured for Danny to join him. "That's not going to happen. I promise you that." "How? Can you promise something like that?" Because I'm going to file for emergency custody today. And then I'm going to fight for the right to adopt you permanently. Danny stared at him in shock. You'd really do that? Even though it might be complicated and expensive? Danny, in the past few weeks, you've brought more joy to this place than I've felt in years. You belong here, not just because of your family connection to the land, but because you've become family to me. 2 hours later, they sat in the office of Janet Morrison, a family lawyer in town that Tom's neighbor had recommended. Janet was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had handled plenty of difficult custody cases. This is definitely unusual, Janet said after hearing their story, but not impossible. The fact that Danny has clear evidence of abuse and that this property has genuine family significance will work in our favor. She looked at Danny kindly. Honey, I need you to understand that there will be interviews and investigations. People are going to ask you some hard questions about what happened in your foster home. Danny nodded nervously. Will I have to see the Hendersons again? Not if I can help it. But you will need to tell your story to social workers and possibly a judge. The legal process moved faster than Tom had expected. Within a week, Danny was officially in Tom's temporary custody, while the state investigated his claims about the Henderson family. A social worker named Patricia came to the ranch for the first inspection. Tom had been worried about what she might think, but Patricia seemed impressed by what she saw. Danny was clearly healthy, happy, and well cared for. The ranch was clean and safe, and Tom had already enrolled Danny in an online school program so he wouldn't fall behind academically. I have to ask, Patricia said as they sat in the kitchen, what made you decide to take on this responsibility? Fostering and adoption are big commitments. Tom looked over at Danny, who was outside teaching one of the barn cats to shake hands. Patricia, I lost my wife 3 years ago, and I thought my life was basically over. Then this kid shows up, and suddenly I remember what it feels like to have purpose again. And you, Danny, Patricia turned to the boy as he came back inside. How do you feel about living here? Like I'm finally home, Danny said simply. Tom doesn't just take care of me, he listens to me. He teaches me things and lets me help with important work. And when I have nightmares, he doesn't get mad. He just makes tea and talks to me until I feel better. Patricia made notes in her file. The state will need to do a background check on you, Tom, and will need character references. That won't be a problem, Tom said, though privately he wondered what his neighbors would think of the situation. He didn't have to wonder long. Word travels fast in small communities, and by the end of the week, half the county seemed to know about Danny. Tom was prepared for judgment and questions, but what he got instead was overwhelming support. Dr. Helen Martinez, the local veterinarian, was the first to call. Tom, I heard about the boy you're helping, she said. If you need a character reference for the legal proceedings, count me in. I've seen how you care for your animals, and anyone who treats creatures with that much respect will be a good father. Next was Bill Rogers from the neighboring ranch. My wife wants to know if you and the boy would like to come for dinner this Sunday. She's been cooking up a storm ever since she heard the story. Even Pastor Jim from the local church called, despite the fact that Tom hadn't been to a service in months. Tom, the congregation has been talking, and we want you to know we're behind. You 100%. That boy needs stability, and from what I hear, you need him just as much as he needs you. The most surprising support came from Mrs. Chun, who ran the general store in town. When Tom and Danny stopped by for supplies, she pulled Tom aside. My grandson goes to school with kids who've been in the foster system, she said quietly. Some of those children have been through hell. What you're doing, it's what more people should do. She handed Danny a small wrapped package. For you, sweetheart. Welcome to our community. Inside was a hand-carved wooden horse, beautifully detailed and smooth to the touch. Thank you, Danny whispered, clutching the gift. It's beautiful. The investigation into the Henderson family revealed disturbing evidence that supported Danny's claims. 2 other foster children came forward with similar stories of abuse and neglect. The Hendersons were arrested, and their foster care license was permanently revoked. When Patricia brought Tom the news, she also had an update on their case. "The state is prepared to support your adoption petition," she said. "Danny's situation with his previous placement was clearly harmful, and the family connection to your property adds compelling evidence that this is in his best interest." That evening, Tom found Danny sitting on the porch steps, watching the sunset and holding the wooden horse Mrs. Chun had given him. "Penny for your thoughts?" Tom asked, settling down beside him. "I keep thinking about what you said about purpose," Danny said. "Before I came here, I didn't think I had any purpose except trying to survive each day. And now?" Danny smiled, the first completely carefree smile Tom had seen from him. "Now, I think maybe my purpose was to find you, just like your purpose was to be here when I needed you." "Could be," Tom agreed. "Your Grandma Rose would be proud of how brave you've been through all this." "You think so?" "I know so. And I think she'd be happy that her land is going to stay in the family." Danny leaned against Tom's shoulder, and they sat together in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to deep purple. In the distance, Star whinnied softly, and the other horses answered, creating a gentle chorus that felt like the land itself was singing them home. "Tom," Danny said quietly. "Yeah? When this is all official, when the adoption goes through, can I start calling you Dad?" Tom felt his eyes fill with tears. "I'd be honored, son. I'd be honored." 4 months had passed since Danny first arrived at the ranch, and the legal paperwork was slowly making its way through the system. While they waited for the final adoption approval, Tom and Danny had settled into a rhythm that felt more natural than either of them had expected. It was like they'd been a family all along, just waiting for the right moment to find each other. Danny had thrown himself into his online schoolwork with the same dedication he showed to caring for the animals. Tom often found him at the kitchen table in the evenings, surrounded by books and papers, pencil tucked behind his ear as he worked through math problems or wrote essays about ranch life. "You know," Tom said one evening, looking over Danny's shoulder at a history report, "you write really well. Your teacher must be impressed." Danny looked up with a proud smile. "Mrs. Patterson said my essay about frontier life was one of the best she's ever received. I think it's because I'm actually living some of the things I'm writing about." Tom had to admit that watching Danny learn was one of his greatest joys. The boy asked endless questions about everything from cattle breeding to crop rotation, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. It reminded Tom of his own childhood, when his grandfather had taught him about ranching through hands-on experience rather than textbooks. One Saturday morning, Danny came up with an idea that surprised Tom. "I was thinking," Danny said as they mucked out the horse stalls together, "we should plant a garden where Beth's used to be." Tom stopped working and leaned on his pitchfork. "What made you think of that?" "I found some old seed packets in the barn yesterday, and some of Beth's gardening tools. I know it's been a few years since she died, but maybe it would be nice to bring that part of the ranch back to life." Tom felt a mix of emotions wash over him. He'd avoided the area where Beth's garden had been because it reminded him too much of what he'd lost. But hearing Danny talk about it, he realized that maybe it was time to create something new rather than just preserving old memories. "You know what?" Tom said. "I think that's a great idea. Beth would love knowing that someone was growing things in that soil again." They spent the next week preparing the ground together. Danny worked with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never had the chance to plant anything before, asking Tom to explain everything from soil pH to companion planting. As they worked, Tom found himself sharing stories about Beth that he hadn't talked about in years. "She always said that gardening was like raising children," Tom explained as they planted tomato seedlings. "You give them the best foundation you can, protect them from the worst dangers, but ultimately you have to trust them to grow into what they're meant to become." "Sounds like good advice for more than just plants," Danny said thoughtfully. One evening, as they watered the newly planted garden, Danny had another idea. "Tom, I want to do something for Grandma Rose, something to honor her memory. What did you have in mind?" Danny pulled the old photograph from his pocket. He carried it with him everywhere now, like a talisman connecting him to his past and his future. "I want to put up a small memorial stone in the garden. Nothing fancy, just something that says she was here and that she mattered. Tom felt his throat tighten. I think that's a beautiful idea, son. They drove to town the next day and ordered a simple granite stone with an inscription that Danny had written, Rose Peterson, beloved, grandmother, who taught us that home is where love lives. When the stone arrived, they held a small ceremony in the garden. Pastor Jim came out to say a few words, and even Dr. Martinez and some of the neighbors joined them. Danny stood next to the stone and spoke about his grandmother with a maturity that amazed everyone present. Grandma Rose always said that love doesn't end when someone dies, it just finds new ways to grow, Danny said. I think she'd be happy to know that her love led me home to this place and to Tom. After the ceremony, as people were leaving, Mrs. Chun pulled Tom aside. That boy has an old soul, she said. He's been through more than most adults, but look how he's chosen to honor his past instead of being bitter about it. Tom nodded, watching. Danny shows some of the younger visitors around the ranch. He's taught me as much as I've taught him. As summer turned to fall, their routines became even more established. Danny had taken over most of the daily animal care, approaching each task with a carefulness and dedication that impressed Tom. The boy had a natural gift for knowing what each animal needed, whether it was extra attention for a nervous calf or a different feed schedule for an older horse. One afternoon, Tom found Danny in the barn with a notebook, carefully writing down observations about each animal's behavior and health. What's all this? Tom asked. I'm keeping records, Danny explained. Grandma Rose always told me that good farmers know their animals as individuals, not just as livestock. I want to make sure I remember everything about each one. Tom looked over Danny's shoulder at the detailed notes. The boy had recorded everything from Star's favorite treats to Thunder's arthritis symptoms, complete with drawings and behavioral observations. This is really impressive work, Danny. Have you thought about what you want to do when you grow up? Danny looked up with bright eyes. I want to be a rancher just like you. And maybe a veterinarian too, so I can help other people's animals get better. That's a great goal. You've definitely got the heart for it. Their evening routine had evolved. After dinner and homework, they would sit on the front porch and watch the sunset. Danny would usually bring one of Beth's books, and Tom would work on ranch planning or just enjoy the peaceful end to each day. Tom, Danny said one evening as they watched the sky turn orange and pink, can I ask you something? Always. Do. You think Beth and Grandma Rose would have been friends if they'd met? Tom considered the question. I think they would have been great friends. They both loved this land, and they both believed in taking care of things that needed protection. I like to think they're watching over us somehow, Danny said quietly, making sure we take good care of each other and the ranch. I like to think that too. As October arrived, they received word that the final adoption hearing was scheduled for the end of the month. Danny would officially become Tom's son, with all the legal protections and family connections that entailed. Are you nervous? Tom asked as they marked the date on the kitchen calendar. A little, Danny admitted, but more excited than nervous. It's like everything that happened before, all the bad stuff, was just leading up to this moment. How do you figure? Danny gestured toward the window, where they could see Star grazing peacefully in the evening light. If I hadn't gone through all that terrible stuff with the Hendersons, I never would have run away. And if I hadn't run away, I never would have found you or learned about this place being Grandma Rose's farm. Tom marveled at the boy's ability to find meaning and purpose in even the darkest parts of his story. You know what I think? Tom said. What? I think your Grandma Rose and my Beth are probably up there somewhere, planning this whole thing together and feeling pretty proud of how it's all worked out. Yeah, I think so too. The morning of the adoption hearing dawned clear and bright, with the kind of golden autumn light that made everything look like it was painted with hope. Danny stood in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to get his tie straight for the third time. Tom had insisted they both wear their best clothes for this special day. Need some help with that? Tom asked, appearing in the doorway with his own tie perfectly knotted. I keep messing it up, Danny said, frustration creeping into his voice. I want everything to be perfect today. Tom stepped behind Danny and gently fixed the tie, their eyes meeting in the mirror. You know what makes today perfect? Not the clothes or how we look. It's that we're doing this together. Danny nodded, taking a deep breath. I'm ready. The courthouse was busier than Danny had expected, filled with people handling all kinds of legal business. As they sat in the waiting area, Danny's leg bounced nervously until Tom placed a steady hand on his knee. It's going to be fine, Tom said quietly. Janet says this is just a formality at this point. The state has already approved everything. When their names were called, they entered a small courtroom where Judge Patricia Wells sat behind an impressive wooden desk. She was a kind-looking woman in her 60s with gray hair and gentle eyes that reminded Danny of his grandmother Rose. Good morning, Judge Wells said with a warm smile. I've reviewed all the paperwork for this adoption, and I have to say, this is one of the most heartwarming cases I've seen in my 30 years on the bench. Janet Morrison, their lawyer, presented the final documents while explaining how perfectly everything had aligned. Danny's background check had revealed his family's historical connection to the ranch. Tom's character references had been overwhelmingly positive. The social worker's reports showed a healthy, happy child thriving in a stable environment. Danny, Judge Wells said, turning to face him directly, I want to ask you a few questions. Are you happy living with Mr. Bradley? Yes, ma'am, Danny said clearly. Happier than I've ever been. And do you understand that adoption means he'll be your legal father forever? Danny's face lit up. Yes, ma'am. I've been hoping for this since the day I met him. Mr. Bradley, the judge continued, are you prepared to take on all the responsibilities of parenthood? The good times and the challenging ones? Tom looked at Danny with unmistakable love in his eyes. Your Honor, Danny has already made me a better man than I was before he came into my life. I can't imagine my future without him in it. Judge Wells smiled and picked up her gavel. Then it is my great pleasure to approve this adoption. Danny Peterson, you are now officially Danny Bradley. Congratulations to both of you. The sound of the gavel hitting the desk was the most beautiful sound Danny had ever heard. Tom immediately pulled him into a hug, and for a moment they both forgot they were in a courtroom. We did it, son, Tom whispered. You're officially my boy now. And you're officially my dad, Danny whispered back, tears streaming down his face. After the paperwork was signed and photos were taken, they drove home in comfortable silence, both processing the magnitude of what had just happened. As they turned into the ranch driveway, Danny noticed something different. Tom, look! Hanging across the front gate was a banner that read, Welcome home, Danny Bradley. In the front yard, what looked like half the county had gathered for a surprise celebration. Dr. Martinez was there with her family. Pastor Jim had brought a cake. Mrs. Chun was setting up a food table, and even some of Danny's online classmates had come with their parents? How did they know? Danny asked in amazement. Small towns have their ways, Tom said with a grin. Besides, everyone's been rooting for us from the beginning. The celebration lasted well into the evening. Danny found himself surrounded by people who had become like extended family over the past few months. Everyone wanted to hear about the court hearing, and many shared stories about how they'd watched Danny blossom since arriving at the ranch. I remember when you first came to town, Mrs. Chun told Danny as they stood near the memorial stone for his grandmother. You were so quiet and scared. Look at you now, helping your dad plan expansion projects for the ranch. Danny blushed. Tom says I have good ideas for someone my age. Your grandmother would be so proud, she said, patting his shoulder. And I think your new mom would be too. As the sun began to set, the crowd gradually thinned until only Tom and Danny remained, sitting on their favorite spot on the front porch steps. Star had wandered over to the fence and was watching them with what Danny swore was a knowing look. Can you believe it's been almost a year since I first showed up here? Danny asked, leaning against Tom's shoulder. Feels like you've always been here, Tom replied. Like this place was just waiting for you to come home. Danny pulled out his grandmother's photograph, now carefully protected in a new frame. I keep thinking about what she said about finding heaven on earth. I thought she meant a physical place, but now I think I understand better. What do you mean? Heaven isn't just about pretty landscapes or nice houses. It's about feeling loved and safe and like you matter to someone. It's about having people who choose to be your family. Tom felt his throat tighten with emotion. That's pretty wise for a 13-year-old. I had good teachers, Danny said with a smile. Grandma Rose taught me about love and you taught me about home. They sat in comfortable silence, watching. The sky turned from gold to deep purple. In the distance, they could hear the gentle sounds of the animals settling in for the night, a peaceful symphony that had become the soundtrack to their lives. "Dad," Danny said, testing out the word in his. "Official capacity double quotes? Yeah, son? I've been thinking about something. Remember when we found all those letters from Grandma Rose and she talked about hoping this place would help heal people? I remember. Well, what if we made that actually happen? What if we started a program where kids who've had tough times could come here and learn about ranching and taking care of animals?" Tom looked at Danny with surprise and pride. "You want to help other kids like you? There are so many kids in the system who just need someone to believe in them. And this place ... Danny gestured toward the rolling hills and peaceful pastures. "This place has magic in it. It saved me. Maybe it could save others too." Tom was quiet for a moment, considering the idea. "You know what? I think that's exactly what your grandmother and Beth would have wanted, a place where broken hearts come to heal. So we can do it? We'll start small, maybe just summer programs at first? But yeah, I think we should do it." Danny's face broke into the biggest smile Tom had ever seen from him. "Really? Really, the Danny Bradley Ranch for Healing Hearts has a nice ring to it." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Danny felt a peace settle over him that was deeper than anything he'd ever experienced. He was home, truly home, with a father who loved him and a future full of possibilities. "Thank you, Grandma Rose," he whispered to the stars. "You were right. I found heaven after all." Tom squeezed Danny's shoulder. "No, son, you didn't just find it, you helped create it." In the distance, Star whinnied softly and the sound carried across the ranch like a blessing, a promise that this land would continue to be a sanctuary for those who needed it most, for generations to come.